everyone. Good evening. Hello and welcome to Chilliteracy. I don't know why I'm doing that. I guess it's kind of spooky season now. Happy Wednesday. How are we all doing? Andy got here just in time. Excuse me. Oh, probably you have a twitchy eyelid. Oh yeah, that always sucks. I get that quite a lot. Also, thank you very much for the 28-month sub. Whoop, whoop, whoop. But yes, hello everybody. How are we all doing on this very wet Wednesday? Certainly in the UK anyway. You're getting some cider snuggles? Excellent. That sounds ideal. But besides that, tired? Fair. I am also tired. Smallcock also tired. Everybody's tired. Seems like one of those days. Pleasant and sunny there, Andy. Nice. Oh, excuse me, the yawns are beginning. You've had a lovely afternoon. I am very glad to hear it. Marvellous. But yes, hello everybody. We have more spookums today. 5th day into you being sick. Better now, but still terrible. Well, that sucks, Quack. I hope that the better continues to go better. Words and things. Hello, Angeline. Hello. We've got everybody in today. Greetings, all of you lovely people. Excuse me. I'll see how my voice feels today. It may be a little bit croaky. I don't know why. It's just deciding to be that way. And I have to sing tenor in a wedding on Saturday, so that's going to be interesting. It's not actually a very low tenor. It's fine. But, yes, I'm a bit croaky. 'Tis the season indeed. Yes. Good luck, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's basically like a normal alto part, really. It's not a low tenor part at all, but it was originally, can you play trumpet in this wedding, please? And then it was, we're down a tenor. Do you mind singing the tenor part? Oh, and could you conduct as well? I was like, I've already given you my fee. This is very sneaky of you. So, oh, the joys. Love it when people do that. It's like, oh, well, can you do this as well? Maybe this, because since you're there. It's like, it's very annoying. Very annoying indeed, but it's fine. It's fine. It's not exactly like I really need to do any actual work for it. Fee and 10% extra for each thing. Yeah. Although, how good are you at baking wedding cakes? Yes, quite. Although this is very much a favour. And I think they had already budgeted for stuff, and I'm sort of doing it as as a favour. Give them a new and updated fee, but then they don't have a trumpet player, which is sad. But yes, tonight we have a couple of stories from my new British Library Tales of the Weird collection, called The Haunted Trail. The first story, I can't find any kind of reliable text for. So if anybody can find anything that isn't a Dropbox file, which is the only thing I could find, then feel free to plonk it in chat. I think I did find one for the second one, but I'll have to do that in the break. But yeah, we've got a wonderfully brilliant name of the first one is The Wind in the Woods by Bessie Kyffin-Taylor, which is an incredible name. Kyffin spelled Kyffin, like Tiffin, but with a Y and a K. It's a great name, isn't it? Bessie Kyffin-Taylor. I love it. So, yes. The Wind in the Woods seems to be the name, yes. But the author name, Bessie Kyffin-Taylor, is great also. But yeah, see stream title, exactly. I have put both the stories we shall be reading tonight in the title. And I had to how did you from Out of the Silence, yeah. Where did you find that then? Oh, is this a US thing? Get you. Ah, I clicked on the wrong thing. I mean, Andy Magic. Yeah, she's good at this. Thanks, Andy. This is why I say it when I can't find something. It's just like, well, if Andy's in chat, it'll probably magically appear. through librarian magic. Reference librarian skills, absolutely. But yes. Oh, sorry, yawning. But yeah, I think that's the only thing your degree is good for. I don't know. Right, let me get my bookmark in the right place. From Daunt Books. Anyone who's ever been to London, go to Daunt Books. Great place. Fantastic bookshop. But yes, if we're all sitting comfortably and have some kind of, I guess, hot beverage, given that it is now autumn and is feeling, cozy and spooky and stuff, then we shall begin with our stories for tonight. The Wind in the Woods by Bessie Kyffin-Taylor. To say I was an artist would be giving myself too high-sounding a name, yet my days were spent in trying, and at times succeeding, in depicting scenes as I saw them, not people. I never attempted portraits, for the expression on human faces more often irritated me than interested. Every 9 out of 10 wore such a worried, harassed look, as if, in the race for gain or pleasure, they had lost sight of all things conducive to rest or repose. I had no wish to paint such things, nor did I wish them to come and pose in their best garments, with a smile such as one and all would, I knew, adopt. Fortunately for me, I was not dependent upon my efforts with brush and pencil, though I confess I made quite a nice income by them, but it was always joy to me to remember, if I did not want to paint, I need not, for my meals were forthcoming, whether I made the price of them or not. I was the owner of a charming flat in London. This was my anchorage, and here I was looked after and cared for by an old family servant, a woman well on in years, who had been for long years a faithful friend and servant in my family, and now in her later years had constituted herself my factotum, ruling my small domain, and incidentally myself, with a firm hand, never by any chance seeming to realise that I really was grown up, but bestowing the same thought upon the changing of my socks on a wet day as she had done when I was 9 or 10. Her name was Mary, Mrs. Mary. As children, we had all adored her. As a middle-aged man, I respected and looked up to her, glad to ask and take her wise advice on many issues of the day. Mrs. Mary was well used to my vagabondish ways, though at times she was wont to say I should be much happier if I married and settled down. I always laughed at her, for my only love story was buried fathoms deep in the dust heap of forgotten things, and the very words "settle down" sent a cold shiver down my spine. It, the settling down process, would mean a wholesale giving up of all those ways I held so dear. No more sudden trekkings at a moment's notice, or coming home any day or any hour, as sure of welcome as I was sure of being safe from questions as to my doings. Mrs. Mary never questioned, though she was always delighted when told where I had been or what I had done. Sometimes I had sketches to show to her, but as often I had none. In either case, she was convinced of my talent and ability, and her faith and loyalty never wavered. It was early in July, when a sudden desire for trees, rivers, and growing things caused me to drop the work I was on, call Mrs. Mary, and request a small Gladstone bag should be packed as quickly as possible, that I was going away. The old lady looked at me keenly, remarking, "You don't look ill." I laughed. "Nor am I," I said, "but it is hot in the town. Also, I feel as if I must see trees instead of people for a while." "That will mean strong boots and knickers, I suppose, sir," was her next remark. "Yes, Mary dear, it will. Also plenty of pipes, baccy, books, and a stick. I may paint, or I may not. In any case, expect me back a month from tomorrow, for sure, unless I send you word. And if you don't hear, why then," I added, laughing, "someone had better begin to look for me." "I do wish you would settle down, Mr. Wilfred," was the old dame's parting shot as she went out to do my behests. Settle down, I mused, filling a much-used old briar. Never. Now, though my thoughts went back to those days of joy when I and a sweet-faced girl with dark eyes and a little fair head just reaching to my shoulder talked in twilight hours of a home that was meant to be. If she had passed to the great beyond, I could have borne it better than the tale of treachery and cunning which ended in my dark-eyed love leaving me on the morning which should have been my wedding day, merely announcing by wire that she had married my best chum Kirk Compton in London that morning. Trouble of that kind takes one of two lines. It either sends a man or a woman to the bad, that is, to drink, gambling, anything of a wild, riotous kind of existence to, as they think, help them to forget, or it sends them into themselves, to more or less live a life of solitude, finding companionship in books or hobbies, fearful of making friends, lest they too should prove unfaithful. One's faith in goodness shattered, it is years, if ever, before one comes into one's own, realizing that there is infinitely more in life than the shallow so-called love of one girl. And so, as I was not addicted to drink or cards, I became a recluse, or almost. I had a few friends, was voted a good chap, but a cynic, and gradually left to my own devices. I was happy as the years went on, finding my books and work all sufficient, while my fervent love of nature proved the healing of my sore, and I was content. July the 20th stared me in the face from a large lettered calendar as I woke for my early cup of tea on the day I was starting for a whole month somewhere in Wales. There is not any object in making a mystery of my destination, except the small fact that my chosen haunt was a very well-known district, within only an hour's journey from a large manufacturing town. Therefore, it is possible that there are people who might recognise and locate the district if I gave more than a mere hint of its place on the map. It has been for years a very favourite corner of mine. The hills which surround it are not so high as to be unclimbable, they are heather-clad, though here and there one came upon an oasis of spongy turf and golden bracken. What I call, in my own mind, kind hills. High enough to lift one up from life's little worries, but not high enough to be awe-inspiring, or to frown down upon us puny mortals. The rivers are fishable after rain, otherwise one can inspect the stones which form the beds of these mountain streams, and decide among the dry stones which place might best conceal a trout when the next rain comes. Personally, I am quite willing to believe that once there were fish in plenty in the stream, but that lean years had driven the farm folks to catch them the best way they could. Perhaps the chief beauty of the place lay in the charm of its many and varied woods. At least this was to me the magnet which drew me here generally once or twice in a year. Up on the hillsides the woods seemed to open out, one into another, ever revealing fresh beauties of trees, from the tender green of the sapling birch to the hoary old beech or oak of many years old. Beneath their green arms the ground was carpeted with soft, tiny wild thyme, wild mint, and little flowers of many kinds whose names were unknown to me. Most of my hours were spent deep in the heart of these woods, which never failed to hold me entranced with their ever-varying lights and shades. Below, nearer to the river, there were woods also, but of quite a different nature. There, high pine trees of sombre hue towered above you, each one seeming to say, "Let me stretch up to the blue sky and leave the gloom of this wood beneath me." For gloom there undoubtedly was. Yet I have liked that gloom. Sometimes, on a hot summer's day, I have enjoyed lying on a soft, dry heap of pine needles, listening to the gentle coo of wood pigeons nesting high above me. Silent Wood, as I called it, was always sheltered from wind, for the pine trees were close together, and beyond a soft sighing wind in the tree-tops, I never remember feeling the wind from any quarter. The sunlight seldom penetrated the silent wood, save only in single shafts between the pines, or, maybe, in some clear patch where a tree had fallen or been cut down. But, even lacking sunshine, it was always warm and dry. One side of the wood was bounded by a path, the other side by the stream. At least in autumn and winter it was, for in summer it dried up or trickled away to reappear a mile or so further on, as if it had tumbled into some old mine shaft, and later changed its course and returned. Silent Wood was not my favourite, but it had a fascination for me, difficult to describe. And on this July morning, when I bid farewell to dear old Mary and started for my holiday, Silent Wood was much in my mind as a quiet place to rest in before I tackled longer, steeper walks, or began to think of taking canvas and paints with me. My journey was long and also suffocatingly hot, dusty and tedious. Many people were travelling, and my compartment was well packed with bundles and packages, as well as people, so I hailed my last change with a sigh of relief. For soon the hills and trees would surround me instead of the bricks and mortar I had grown so tired of. A broken-down trap, drawn by a fat Welsh pony, met me at my station. From thence we crawled up 4 long miles of hill ere I reached my favourite quarters, an old farmhouse in which I was always a welcome guest, and where 2 cheery rooms were always at my disposal. The peacefulness of that first evening will linger in my memory for many a day. To be able to gaze around, seeing nothing but hills, fields, trees and sky, instead of houses, chimneys, motors and people, was pure joy to me. And when, after a simple meal, I lit my pipe, I felt content to linger in the warm, hay-scented air indefinitely. There are those to whom the contemplation of such a holiday as the one I thought lay before me would have been a dire penalty. Those to whom solitude and nature would spell boredom and weariness, and I pity all those natures, for they know not what they miss. I passed a gloriously restful night, and was up early, with a long day of golden sunshine ahead of me. I had never been here in July before. Early spring or September had been my usual seasons, but to be here in July, in radiant warmth and beauty, was a treat I was prepared to revel in. Day by day slipped by, in almost complete idleness, until a week had vanished, almost unnoticed by me, for calendars had been left behind me, and I, more often than not, forgot to wind up my watch. I had no use for time. I ate when I felt hungry, and slept when I was tired, but the end of this week found me thinking of brush and canvas, so I decided to take my lunch in my pocket, trusting to luck for some tea if I desired it, and prepared for a long day's sketching. "Which way do you think of going, sir?" asked my hostess, more, I fancy, from politeness than from any real interest in my goings and comings. "Oh, I don't know," I answered, "but probably I shall wander to the woods." "Which, sir?" she next inquired, a little to my surprise. "Probably the shadiest," I replied, smiling. "The one below with the pine trees, and silence is the one I most fancy today." "The higher woods are nicer, sir, don't you think?" was her next remark. "No, I don't," I said. "I like the pine woods. They are always so intensely silent. One never feels any wind there, and there is a breeze today." "That is true, sir," said Mrs. Hughes. "There isn't any wind there, as a rule. as a rule," I echoed. "Why, I've never felt it there, not even in autumn." "No, sir, you wouldn't then, but you may now, and I'd go to the upper woods if I were you." Now, Mrs. Hughes had never, to my knowledge, taken the slightest interest in my doings previously, and her persistence this morning simply had the effect of making me feel perverse, as is the way of men. So smilingly I bade her good morning, determined in my own mind that Silent Wood should be my destination for that day. The good lady ventured no further remarks, but turned away to busy herself with farm duties, leaving me free to set off without further questioning. There was a slight breeze, just enough to make walking more pleasant, but rather more than I liked for sketching purposes, so I was glad when I dipped down from the path by the riverside to the edge of my pet woods. They were, as ever, still, dark and airless, just as I had pictured them many, many times as I smoked my pipe beside my studio fire while busy London surged on beneath my windows. In those woods I have always felt as if I must tread softly. I do not remember ever to have sung or whistled there, yet there was never anything to disturb, for I have never seen even a rabbit. It seemed too sombre a place for animal life. Moreover, there was nothing but dry pine needles for them to eat. I don't remember ever seeing the wood pigeons I occasionally heard above my head, so, lacking animal life, the place was even more silent than deep woods usually are. It suited me in my present mood, however, and in the intense silence lay its greatest charm. Somewhere in the world there are a few kindred spirits, I have no doubt, to whom such perfect silence and freedom from every jar would appeal as it appeals to me. Those who often crave for just 1 hour's unbroken silence, and who find it one of the most difficult things to attain. Those to whom the incessant opening and shutting of doors, clattering of things, ringing of bells, voices, and the coming and going of people have to be endured with a smile, though every nerve may be on edge, and the aching for quietness is almost more than can be borne. Those people, and those only, will enter into and fully understand the intense charm to me of Silent Wood. I entered it, as usual, on this morning as on many previous ones, walking softly as if not wanting to disturb its peace by so much as a snap of a dry twig, and as I walked deeper and deeper into the shadows, it seemed to grow stiller and more silent. The scent of the pines was soothing, and the warm, dry air seemed to draw it out and intensify it. About the centre of the wood I paused to look and listen. Not a sound broke the stillness, save only the faintest cooing of the wood pigeons. So there, in the patch of sunlight, I drew together heaps of pine needles to form a couch, stretching myself on it in complete enjoyment, canvas and brushes idle by my side. The natural outcome of such an environment and such quiet calm was to fall soundly asleep, a glorious, restful sleep, knowing that there could not be any early knocking at my door, no engagements to keep, nothing, no one for whom I need wake until I had slept all I desired. I woke at long length with the softest of breezes blowing gently on my face, so softly as to make me wonder, in my half-asleep state, if it also were a part of my dreams. But no, there it was again, soft and cold, and this time a little stronger. I opened my eyes. Surely it must be night, I thought. How many hours had I slept? It seemed dark, yet high up between the pine tree tops I could catch a glimpse of blue sky. Then it is not late, I thought, but how dark it is here under the trees. I must see the time and shake myself into a more reasonable state of mind, for truly I feel almost nervy. So my thoughts ran as I raised myself from my pine-needle couch and stood up. I glanced round and could scarcely believe it was my beloved silent wood. It seemed so chill and dark, not the soft gloom I was accustomed to there, but an eerie darkness as of a gathering storm. But ever and anon a little moaning wind swept past me, each just seeming more chill and dank. "Horrible," I murmured, fastening up my coat before preparing to pick up my little knapsack of odds and ends. "Horrible. I never thought the place could be so chilly. I'll get out as speedily as I can, for it must be late." I peered at my watch, which was difficult to see in the gloom, to find I had, as usual, forgotten to wind it. "It is probably about 4, I said aloud, "but it's like night." I spoke aloud, and my voice seemed to come back to me in mocking echo from the far side of the wood, like night. I never knew there was an echo, I thought. "I'll try again tomorrow," I said clearly, and back from the distance came the echo, "tomorrow." And a hoarse laugh came with it. I started. I had not laughed. Then who? "Oh, you idiot," I muttered, giving myself a shake. "It's some country yokel answering you back, making a fool of you. Pull yourself together and get off home. You require your tea." So, with a last look round, I turned my face towards home, and tea, but my feet seemed weighted, and seemed as if I could not leave the wood, eager as I was to reach the daylight. I seemed to have already dragged myself double the distance I had to go ere I found myself at the edge of the wood, shivering in every limb, chilled to the bone, unnerved, as I could not believe possible, over nothing at all. In the warmth of the sun I speedily recovered, and was ready to laugh at my own stupidity. To prove this to my own satisfaction, I gaily shook my fist at the woods behind me, calling back, "Tomorrow!" And, far away in the distant darkness, I fancied, for it could only have been fancy, I heard a mocking echo and a faint sound of laughter, as if the word "tomorrow" floated back to me. Fancy or not, it served to hasten my steps, and the farm kitchen with its cheery tea table, which I hurried to reach, quickly dispelled any lingering fear I might have felt. For the first time since my holiday began, I passed a restless night, burdened, when I slept at all, by dreams of mocking voice and laughter. My first thought on waking was one of dire vengeance on someone for causing me to lose a precious night's sleep. I would repay them, I vowed as I sprang up, preparing to dress as rapidly as possible. "Will you be in, sir, for lunch, or will you take it out?" asked my hostess, as soon as I had finished a wonderful breakfast of home-cured ham, fresh eggs, scones, and homemade jam. "I will take it out, please, Mrs. Hughes," I replied. "Some of that fine ham and some bread and butter, if you will be so good. Don't make it into those abominations called sandwiches, though. It would utterly spoil both bread and ham. I never can enjoy food done up in that way. The bread tastes of ham, and the ham only tastes of bread, and both are dry and worn out by the time you want your lunch. So, separately, please, if you love me." Mrs. Hughes eyed me as if uncertain whether to laugh or scold at what she termed my oddities. The laugh triumphed, and she went off chuckling over the ways of faddy men-folks. Presently the good lady reappeared with a neat parcel, which she handed to me with the remark, "There you are, sir, separately, and I hope you will enjoy your lunch. Which way will you be going, sir?" So again my destination seemed to be of interest to the worthy dame, but this time I wasn't going to let her off so easily. "Why do you ask, Mrs. Hughes?" I inquired. "Well, sir, it's Tommy, she said hesitatingly, Seems like the lad likes to be on the lookout for you, sir, and always pesters me to say which way you've gone, sir." As the good lady was speaking, she edged nearer and nearer the door, and her final words were uttered as the door closed between her and myself, leaving me looking rather blankly at the door, and quite unable to reconcile Tommy's present anxiety as to my whereabouts, seeing the lad had not apparently noticed my existence up till now. However, they were none the wiser. No one save myself knew whither I was bound, and if I changed my mind, no one would know or care. I debated a few moments as to whether to burden myself with sketching materials or not, and finally a happy thought struck me. I would take my Kodak. It was ready loaded with new and highly sensitive films, so if I liked I could take special bits, and later, if I wished, sketch or enlarge from them in the quiet of my studio. So, with my camera on my shoulder, my lunch in a handy pocket, I set off, prepared for another happy peaceful day in Silent Wood. Yet, now I had started, I wondered if it really would give me the pleasure I had anticipated to fulfil my vow of vengeance on him, her, or it who had mocked me the previous day. I was quite determined, on one point, that I would discover the hiding place of my mocking friend, and rid myself of the disturber of my sanctuary. To begin with, I would not enter the woods by my usual path. I had a fancy to inspect the far side of it, which was as yet unknown to me, and which I had often thought of exploring, but so far had been too lazy to do so. It had been sufficient for me to get into the still warmth, and there to stay, resting, dreaming or reading, but today I felt energetic, braced up, ready for anything. So instead of taking the lower path by the river to the woods, I struck off higher up, crossed a few fields and some tiresome fences, heavily loaded with barbed wire as if to keep out some invading enemy and not the 3 or 4 cows it guarded. My plan had led me higher than the woods, which now lay stretched below me in a large triangle, thick and dense, possibly 1/2 mile in length. Not more, I shouldn't think. Looked at from where I stood, it appeared quite an insignificant patch of dark trees surrounded by fields of waving corn or haycocks, late in being carted home. Here and there men and women were working in the fields. I could hear a reaper busy somewhere, and voices of children at play sounded clearly in the distance. It was gloriously sunny. Not a breath of wind stirred the leaves or grasses. Yet, in spite of its beauty and brilliance, the dark trees lying below seemed to call me. I could see the waving branches of the pine trees as if they were arms beckoning me to come, to rest in their shade. I knew I had to go. I knew in my heart I wanted to go. Yet I lingered, drinking in the beauty of fields and sunshine as I strolled along, until, descending gradually, I found myself near the edge of the woods, at exactly the opposite corner from my usual point of entrance. One more fence, a thick one of briars, thorns and undergrowth, and I was in my beloved woods. It wasn't quite so dark on this side as the other, yet it felt more desolate, more cheerless somehow. Possibly fewer people came this way, which might account for it. Anyway, here I was, and now to explore. First, I quietly skirted the wood for a little way, but this proved uninteresting, so I struck in under the pines, and almost at once was conscious again of the warm, scenty feeling of the air. "Glorious," I murmured. "How peaceful, how still. But I will not rest yet. I want to look round first." Presently, I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a building. Funny place for a house, I thought. I wonder if anyone lives there. If so, my friend of the mocking laughter is now unearthed. So, with a smile at my own smartness, I marched on until I reached the building. At least, what I thought was a building, now, alas, a ruin. 2 ends and one side were almost intact. The rest, except one chimney, was just piles of rough grey stones. It had every appearance of having been deserted many years, for the tumbled-down stones were moss-grown, with here and there little ferns protruding between the crevices. The spot must once have been a lonely corner, though now it looked utter desolation. Laying my camera and lunch down, I strolled to have a nearer inspection of the lonely ruin before I sat down. There was not any trace to be found of how many rooms the cottage had once contained, though probably 3 or 4 was the limit. What must once have been a fireplace faced me as I entered, and on one side, about 2 yards from the ground, were 5 stone stairs. Evidently there had been a stone staircase or steps leading to an upper room or rooms, though no sign of any floor above remained now. I couldn't imagine a stone house falling to pieces so completely. It gave one the impression more of having been hurled down stone after stone. Nothing else would have demolished it so utterly. There being nothing more to inspect, I strolled back to my belongings. But the sight of my camera reminded me that, after all, I could get a picture of so battered a domicile without the fag of sketching it. It would be interesting, I thought, to have a photograph of those 5 curious stone steps and battered walls, so I quickly found my focus, taking the picture from a little distance to get a big pine in as well. It was a curious tree. At least half of it had apparently been shattered at some time. I then went closer, focusing for the stone steps only. It was shady within the walls, so I gave a little longer time, and hoped for success, though I felt sorry I had not even yet succeeded in getting exactly the point of view I wanted. I had 1 film left. I would wait until the sun lit up the far side, and I would take that also. That was enough for now, and I had earned both lunch and rest. Somehow, my moss cushion did not give me the comfort I liked, though to try to say why was beyond me. Apparently it left nothing to be desired. My back was against a pine as I faced the deeper shade of the woods in front of me. There was not any wind to disturb me, and no sound of any kind. All was quiet, serene, peaceful, and yet... Again, and yet again, I found myself involuntarily turning to look over my shoulder at the heap of grey stones behind me. I didn't want to look at it. I had seen enough of it, yet turn I must, and did. I was getting fanciful, for I could have sworn I saw a shadow of some person flit past the one-time doorway. Surely I had not missed a part of the place in my search, and there was someone hiding there. I would make sure. To this end, I walked right round the place, looking well among the old bushes and holly trees. No sign of life. So I went back to my cushion and my rest. 1 pipe I smoked, falling asleep ere I had finished it, to wake with a violent start, springing from my seat, sure, positive then, as I shall always be, that someone had laid a hand on my face. I tried to imagine a crawling thing had wandered over my face. I imagined a leaf falling, even tried the effect by closing my eyes and dropping a leaf onto my cheek. It was useless. No amount of thinking could make me believe that touch was aught but a hand. Ghosts? I didn't believe in. I always looked on yarns of such things as the results of too heavy a supper or a too vivid imagination, so was inclined to laugh at what I struggled so hard to minimise. I tried to whistle, but if you try to whistle with the corners of your mouth turned down, you will understand that effort ended in failure. I tried to hum a song, which resulted in a species of quavering dirge. I got up, I stamped, I beat the soft, unoffending turf with my stick. I did everything I could think of to shake off a creepy feeling that was fast getting a firmer hold of me, anything to avoid turning round as I felt impelled to do. All was useless. I might as well give in, but had now quite made up my mind I had had enough of the remains of the cottage. I would leave it to its solitude, first taking one more photo, then I would go on straight through the deep shades I loved and out at the side I knew best. Just once, I admit it, I looked towards the fence and bank down which I had come, almost furtively. I glanced that way, as if in my heart I would rather have returned by the same path, but it was only momentary, for I knew that through Silent Wood was the way I should go. I picked up my camera for my final snapshot, choosing the far side of the ruined place, now in the sunshine, and exposed my film. As the shutter clicked, the sunlight vanished, as if a heavy cloud had suddenly obscured it, and the camera in my hand shook as if it had been hit. My hands were perfectly steady, I am positive of that, yet I had all but dropped my precious toy. Someone must have thrown a stone, I decided, but who the someone was or where they were I did not venture to look into. Enough for me that I had got my pictures and was ready to start through the woods and so home to tea. I was probably halfway, having long passed out of sight of the ruins, when I remembered my long-forgotten ham and bread. I had better eat it, I supposed, so feeling happy again, now that I was in the warm gloom of my favourite place, I made for myself another cosy seat and proceeded with the now somewhat belated lunch. I was just about to bury the paper wrapping, as is my way, when it suddenly whisked away in a sudden gust of wind. "Wind?" I exclaimed. "Here? Impossible!" As I spoke, another little gust whirled past me, scattering the pine needles and whirling a little crowd of dried bits round my feet. "It really is most remarkable," I murmured to myself. "The times without number I have been in these woods and never felt the smallest breath of wind until yesterday and today. I'd best be moving. It may rain, though I'll be dry enough here if it does. All the same, I'll go." As I rose, another and another draught of cold air swept by me, and then a sudden quietness fell, and all around me seemed to be growing darker and still darker. Little whispering winds seemed chattering above my head, and colder and more chilly it seemed to grow. I started off hurriedly, only to find in the gathering darkness I had missed my way. On and on I plunged, deeper and deeper the blackness grew, colder and colder the wind, now rising almost to a gale, anon dying away with a moaning sound. Bravely I struggled, wildly endeavouring to locate one familiar tree or stone. The wind, now icily cold, seemed to lash me, buffeting me as if I, strong man as I was, had been but a weak, puny child. Suddenly I stopped, determined to find my bearings, determined I would not be driven along as I was. I raised my face. My eyes were streaming with water in the smarting cold of the lashing wind. Gloom, black gloom, met me on every side. Pines, once familiar, now seemed twice their original size, standing out rigid, gaunt and black, no glimmer of light anywhere. "My God, I am utterly lost," I said aloud. "Utterly lost," came back a voice from far away, and with the words, making my blood freeze and heart stand still, a shriek of hideous laughter. With a valiant effort I steadied my voice and shouted aloud, "Who are you? Come to my help!" "To my help," rang out the voice, and I shuddered as a shrill peal of laughter followed it. "Won't you come?" I cried once more. "You come," echoed the voice, and the laughter that came with it seemed of many voices. The gruff, hoarse laughter of a man, the shrill, cackling laugh of a woman, and even, I was sure, the laughter of children. On I plunged, gasping now for breath, praying, hoping for deliverance, lost but blindly struggling to reach some haven of refuge. A more vicious bang of the tearing wind suddenly sent me forward, and I seemed to have reached grass at last. With a sob of relief, I raised my eyes, thinking to see the grass at the edge of the wood, but was frozen stiff with horror and amazement to find myself on the clearing with the ruined cottage before me. Ruined cottage, I called it, ruined no longer. To my amazed eyes, it appeared intact. A door stood ajar, a window on each side of it, through each of which glimmered a faint light. 2 windows above, from one of which peered a white, tearful face. A man with an evil, sinister face stood beneath the lone pine, holding a wailing child by its hair with one hand, and in the other, oh God, the horror of it, a long, sharp knife which glistened as the glimmer from the windows struck it. I didn't faint, I didn't fall, so rooted to the spot was I. I seemed as if made of stone. The wind had all but died away, and but for the fact that, now in my now frenzied brain, I knew I had seen the place desolate and ruined, I should have thought I was faced with a workman's dwelling, peopled by real beings. I knew it was not so. Fascinated, horrified, I gazed. The man moved, with a muttered curse, dragging the child with him up to the door. As he reached it, the wind redoubled its fury, howling, shrieking like every evil let loose. I fell on my knees, powerless now to even pray, and hiding my face in my hands, I waited for some awful thing I knew was to come. It came with a wild scream of awful horror, the scream from an upstairs window, and then a second, the shrill, awful scream of a child. Agonized, I knelt and saw the man lurch through the door, reeling, join a group of waiting people hitherto unseen by me. As he came up to them, one of the women spoke to him, and then began to laugh. Oh God, the unspeakable horror of that laugh! One after another of the group spoke to the man, and each, as they moved off, laughed or chuckled. Even 2 small boys who were with them burst into shrill laughter. I cannot describe it, save only in one way it sounded like fiends from hell, so vile, so malicious, so diabolical were those awful sounds. As I knelt, unable to move, I struggled to keep a hold of myself. I found I was striving to explain away what I knew in my heart was totally inexplicable. I whispered to myself, that laughter is real, is human, hideous as it is. But I knew it was neither real nor human. Always, to my dying day, it will ring in my ears, laughter such as no human creature could be responsible for. Quite suddenly, there came a lull in the wind, a stillness in the air. The laughter died away. Could I, dare I move, rise and venture to look? But even as I thought of it, the wind, with redoubled fury, broke forth again, causing me to crouch still lower as it swept over me. An awful crash sounded, a crash that echoed and re-echoed through the woods. The wind had seized and felled, as if with giant hand, the pine that had been standing at the far side of the cottage. So terrific was the blow that the end of the cottage where it hit fell like a house of cardboard. To demolish the rest of it seemed but child's play, as with one whistling shriek the wind tore beneath the now shattered roof, ripping it off, and almost the remainder of the walls, with a deafening roar, high above which rang out peal after peal of hideous laughter, until it too died away as now the wind was dying, dying fitfully with an angry gust and then a sobbing wail, until at length a long, low wail seemed to pass through the woods and fade into silence. A long silence. At last I moved, raised my head, looked, listened. Nothing. No sound broke the stillness. The ruined cottage was as I had first seen it, just a worn, weather-beaten heap of grey stones, a semblance of a fireplace, 5 stone stairs. That was all. I ventured nearer, trying to persuade myself I had dreamt the horrible scene. I must have dreamed it, for it had been dark, pitch dark, when the wind had begun to rise, and yet by what light then had I witnessed this awful thing? For light of some kind surely there had been. Who were those people I had seen, and from whom came that awful laughter? I was trembling yet, shaken, feeling desperately ill. No dream had brought me to this pass. Then what? Visitants from beyond? But to what end? For they and their works were evil. I turned abruptly, with one thought in my head, to get out of the wood and home. I glanced at my watch, having made a point this time of winding and setting it right. Only 5 o'clock. I must be mad. I had gone through hours of dark night. How could it possibly be but 5? I supposed, long afterwards, when I reviewed these hours, that it was the knowledge that it was only 5 o'clock, and not perhaps, as I expected many hours later, that gave me the fillip of courage which led me to linger still another moment near the ruins, and gaze as if to print the thing on my mind. I stood possibly 3 yards from the ruined doorway, and said aloud, "It was a murder." Away through the woods came the mocking answer, "A murder." "Oh, God!" I gasped. "Not again, for they are fiends from hell." "From hell," came back the answer, and again the awful sound of laughter of many voices. I turned and fled, holding my hands over my ears as I strove to run. I remember knocking violently against something and falling endlessly, or so it seemed, and then nothingness, until I opened my eyes 3 weeks later to find myself in bed in my quaint room at the farm, and beside my bed, placidly knitting, sat Mrs. Merry. "Merry!" I whispered, and the sound or want of sound in my own voice startled me. "Yes, it's me, sir," answered the dear soul, "and high time too. But we are not talking, sir, if you please. It is medicine time, and then you'll sleep." I only too gladly obeyed, unquestioningly, as I obeyed for many weeks, the quiet though firm commands of Mrs. Merry. I was far too weak to fight, even had it been of the slightest use. Indeed, it was very little less than 6 weeks ere I was permitted to ask a question or have my own way in anything. But at length a day came when I was allowed to sit in a chair by the window, from which the view was something only expressed by colour. Words could not do it. I gazed for a long time in silence, then said, "I am well now, Mary. Tell me what brought you. What has been wrong with me? Where was I? Everything. I must know." She looked at me, then put her glasses on. She always did that if she meant to talk severely, then said abruptly, "You'd been missing for 2 days when they found you." "Missing for 2 days?" I asked incredulously. "But where was I?" "You were at the bottom of an old lead mine," she answered, "on a big heap of dead leaves and ferns. Luckily it wasn't one of the deep mines, and also the leaves and ferns saved you, though how they got there is a mystery," she added. "But how on earth—" I began. "Quite so, sir," she went on. That's what we all want to know. How on earth, unless you were mooning along and wandered into a weak place in the ground above the mine? That's where you were, anyway, in one of the small shafts close to the old ruined cottage. You were quite unconscious. You must have had your camera in your hand, sir, because it was beside you, though how it wasn't broken is another mystery. Bring me my camera, Mary dear, I said. Very well, sir, she answered. That can't do you no harm. And off she went, to return presently, gingerly holding my Kodak as if fearful of it. She was right. By some marvel it was unhurt. Moreover, the number of the film I had last turned to stood clearly forth. I would have them developed at once. I felt curious, but I had not yet asked all my questions. Who found me, Mary? I next asked. Tommy Hughes, sir. Tommy Hughes? I said. What made him look for me? Well, sir, answered the old lady, they do say as he found another gentleman once in the same place, and when you didn't come home he set off to look for you. Was the other chap hurt, Mary? I asked. No, sir. At least not hurt, sir, because he was lying on ferns and leaves just the same. Oh, no, he wasn't hurt, sir, not his body. What do you mean? I asked. Tell me, please. Oh, dear, sir, how you do worry, and it's time for your soup anyway. Tell me first, Mary, I said. She glanced at me to see if I was in earnest, and then seemingly decided that for the moment, at least, I was the boss. His body was all right, sir. It was his head, at least his wits, sir. He's been in a lunatic place ever since, so they say, she amended, with a sniff which I knew meant utter disbelief in gossip or village yarns. I did not so entirely disbelieve, for as the fragments of memory began to join together, I shuddered as I recalled my experience, and could only too readily believe that a very little weaker-minded individual than I would very easily lose his reason if he went through all I had done. I would, however, leave further questioning until the next day, for I had observed the snap with which my dear old Mary had closed her lips. The following day my doctor paid me a visit, one of his many, but this time he came in less professional manner. In fact, he had every appearance of spoiling for a gossip. I could have wagered my last sou on it, so wasn't surprised when he accepted my offer of tea and a smoke with alacrity. The tea disposed of, he did not beat about the bush, but asked me if I could give him any light at all on my accident. I am curiously interested, he said, because you are not my first case to have had a very similar accident. Did your other patient make as good a recovery, Doctor? I asked, instead of, as politeness demanded, answering his question. No, he did not, he replied. He never recovered and never will, in my opinion. He is mentally deranged, though all searching has failed to reveal a cause. He is quiet, generally, and peaceable, but in a high wind he becomes frenzied, utterly distraught. His attendants are unable to cope with him. Often he shrieks and yells, for the most part unintelligible rubbish. One night, in a furious gale, a man was blown over in the grounds, and the attendants were laughing about it when, without apparent reason, the poor insane chap fell on the luckless attendant and half killed him, shouting all the time, "Stop laughing, will you?" It's always the same if the wind blows. They take him to a more sheltered room when it blows hard now. Tell me, will you, what preceded your fall? There must be some sort of link between the two, because in your delirium you raved of the wind, though we've had no wind to speak of since your arrival. I'll tell you the story, Doctor, though you will be inclined to put me with your other patient, unless I can convince you, and this I may perhaps do, if my camera depicts what I saw. I told him my experiences during 2 days in the woods I loved. I gave him every detail, even to the taking of the snapshots of the place, and he listened, silently puffing at his pipe, until I ended by telling him of how I struck something violently and fell, remembering nothing more until I found myself in my room. There was a long pause as I finished. He seemed unable to speak. So I asked him how Mrs. Merry came upon the scene. She arrived after you had lain long unconscious, saying you had said if you were not home in a month to come and look for you. Not hearing, she came and found you, as I have said, and has since nursed you devotedly. What does it all mean, Doctor? I then said. His answer disconcerted me. I do not know, though I have heard strange stories told of the pine woods, which you are pleased to call silent, but I confess I have hitherto put them down to an extra glass or two of beer. Now, for the first time, I am bound to think more seriously of them, having on my hands first the strange maniac, and then you, found in the same spot, under similar conditions, and, strangest of all, on the same day of the year. I don't know the tale, but no doubt your worthy host does. Ask him, and meanwhile develop your snapshots, though I do not hope for much in the way of proofs from them. I will look in tomorrow. You had better rest now. And my matter-of-fact materialistic doctor picked up his hat and departed. I sat at my window for a long time, thinking much, hearing again in fancy the roar of the wind, the laughter of fiends, the crash of the tree. As it grew dark, I was possessed with the desire at all costs to develop those films. So, calling Mrs. Merry, I told her I was tired and was going to bed, that there was nothing I required, so, bidding her good night, I made my rough and ready preparations, lacking all the essentials of a proper darkroom, but in these days, tabloids of developers, a jug full of water, a candle lamp with a crimson silk scarf tied round it, would serve me very well. The first negative came up beautifully. Just an ordinary communal garden broken down cottage. The second was a different story, and I watched it fearfully. There was distinctly, unmistakably, a form of a man going into the doorway. The third film, taken from the other side of the cottage, showed me a lower window, more or less unbroken, in the frame of which was the face of a man. So much I could see, but to me that meant much, for I knew that I was alone, horribly alone at that moment of taking the photo. Next morning I was up earlier than had been permitted for some time, and a very few minutes sufficed to print a rough print from each negative. I stared at them, with my eyes nearly starting from my head. They were good photos, clear, sharply defined, no woolly-looking details, so easily mistaken for other than the actual things I intended to take, except the figure and the face. Those I neither saw nor intended to portray, yet there they were. And, as is so often the case, the camera lens depicted what the human eye did not see. The figure, tall, gaunt, seemed as if going into the house, but the face in the frame of the window was unmistakably the face of the man who passed me, who entered the house, from which issued those screams of agony. The man who later joined the group of people to whom he spoke, the people who made the air hideous with their horrible laughter. I kept my own counsel, hiding the photos also until late in the afternoon the doctor made his appearance. He studied them carefully, and then said, "I should have laughed at your story, my friend, laughed at your photos of your so-called empty cottage last evening, but tonight I cannot. I made a few inquiries after I left you, and the outline of what I gleaned was this. The cottage was built when the lead mines were working for the use of the men, and was subsequently taken possession of by a foreman. He was a glum, taciturn brute, given to drink and gambling. He brought with him to the cottage, known as Leadmine Cottage, a very pretty young girl as his wife, though gossips say she was not. He seemed passionately attached to the girl, and also to a little child of 3, said to be his niece's child. The man, by the name Woodrow, led an almost double life, one half of which was spent with a gang of men and women with whom he was said to drink and gamble, and who used to jeer at him for what they spoke of as his milksop life in company of his so-called wife. When with her, he was simply a devoted husband, and when sober, always refused to associate with the gang who other times attracted him. Finally, the gang of criminals, I can call them nothing better, tried to embitter him against the girl, whom they thought was getting a firmer hold on him. One or other of them started to fill his mind with suspicions of the girl, telling him that chance visitors found Leadmine Cottage attractive. They used to follow him home, for the fiendish joke of hearing him abuse the girl and threaten her with worse things if she was untrue to him. These fiends finally plotted, and eventually sent a young doctor out there, saying someone was ill in the cottage. The unsuspecting doctor called late one evening, and Woodrow was persuaded to hide in the trees and watch. It was, I am told, a wild, stormy evening, one of those sudden storms that come in these mountain districts in summer and break down corn, lash rivers to fury, and hurl trees and branches to the ground. Woodrow watched and saw the doctor enter, saw him speak to the girl, saw her smile at him, and laughing give him her hand as she might do to a doctor who desired to feel her pulse, though this was apparently not the construction put upon her innocent action by her husband, goaded to madness by drink, as well as by his uncontrollable jealous nature. He waited until the doctor had gone, and then entered the cottage, murdered his wife and child, afterwards rejoining his fellow criminals, whom it is said received his news with jest and laughter, glorying in the success of the vile plot which they guessed would give him wholly back to them and their evil ways. The cottage and all trace of the crime was effaced, so 'tis said, by the sudden rising of the wind, bringing down a tree which fell athwart the house, shattering it to bits. The gang are believed to have fled the country, all but one, who later died in hospital after giving the story to a medical man there, whom, by a curious coincidence, if indeed there be such things, wrote it to a colleague of mine, whom I met last night at a dinner. It is a strange story, and one, in the light of your recent experience, not to be gainsaid. The story goes on to say that in the same month every year the murder takes place, with every detail complete, even to the rising wind, and that those who know the story and the wood shun it as the plague during that month. At any other time, I believe it justifies your name for it of Silent Wood. That is the story, my friend. Make of it what you will. I have also taken the liberty of asking an aged miner to look in this evening. I want you to be good enough to start chatting casually of the wood, your fall, etc., and show him your photos. Don't give him any other lead. Now, I will see if he has come. He is very old, but can see pretty well. His little grandchild is bringing him here to see me, to save time, and the old boy wants a dose for a cough. With this, the doctor vanished, to return almost at once, leading an old man by the arm. They tell me folks live long up here, and surely it must be so, if this is a specimen, for the old man looked 90, and hale at that, though bent and withered. I gave him a chair and baccy, but instead of filling his pipe, he stared at me with clear, penetrating eyes, and mumbled, "So you're the gent that fell down the mine?" "Yes," I said, "I'm that unfortunate man." "Did you fall, or were you put there?" he questioned, sniggering to himself. "I don't know," I said. "No, my boy, but I do. he wheezed, pointing a claw-like finger at me. "I do. Ye were put there, my lad. Put there, look you. And so will others be if they do not keep away from the pines in July." "I took a picture of it," I said after a pause. "A picture? Whatever," answered the aged being. "Show me the picture. I once worked there." "Hurry," whispered the doctor. "He quickly fails." I handed him the picture, holding a powerful magnifying glass over it as I did so. Aye, there's Johnny Woodrow's house," he muttered. All in a heap. "This is another," I said. "My God!" burst from his shaking lips. "My God, there's Johnny Woodrow! Johnny Woodrow, my old pal! Why, I thought him was dead. He is dead, I knows he's dead. How could he live after murdering his wife and little child? Murdered them he did in the cottage by the pines, and them as interferes with the cottage, he put 'em down the mine. He said he would put 'em in a mine to starve if they move a stone or meddle with what he calls her grave. He told me he'd do it afore he went away. His very words were, 'Living or dead, I'll do it, Bob.' And what Johnny says he'll do, he will do." His old head fell forward on his breast as he finished speaking, so we did not speak, save in a whisper. "He sleeps," said the doctor. "Presently he will wake, but will not remember. We will leave him. Mary will take him home, and I'll send him some stuff in the morning. The old boy is nearly through, he added. But I am glad he was here to give you what you wanted. Proof. Though proof of what, or for what reason, I cannot pretend to fathom. We parted a little later, my doctor and I, he to go on with his work for sick humanity, I, on the morrow, to return to my studio in London, back to the turmoil of town, back to live among the haunts of men, to leave the beauty of hills and rivers, but in some quiet hour in my studio, maybe during some winter night of wind and storm, I shall hear again the hideous laughter, shall dream of the scent of the pines. Nay, maybe I shall even try to forget the horror of all I went through, and may memory, sometimes kind, only recall the peace, the scent, the perfect still quietness of the woods I loved best, when I knew them only as silent wood. The end. Thank you for listening. That was really difficult to read, actually. Just personal opinion here, I don't think that's particularly well written. There were a lot of repetitions in some bits there, and there are a lot of semicolons when there should be full stops, and a lot of run-on sentences. So it was a bit like trying to read ahead a bit. But I like the vibe. I like the vibe in that one. Spooky pine forest. The tea disposed of was a good phrase. Yes, it is. But yes, thank you very much for the raid. Tisseur de rêve? I don't know. Thank you very much indeed. And have I missed anybody's resub? Diana! Yes, of course. Thank you very much for resubscribe. I can speak. Resubscribing. Also, I don't know if anyone else was getting vibes from either. I don't know. Again, don't know if author or character, but I was getting a bit of like autistic vibes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like the way the character was written, like doesn't like sandwiches because can't have like food stuffs sort of infiltrating whatever, but can't have foodstuffs touching. Also desperately needing quiet, being very particular about texture wrong, exactly, like being very particular about things, and it's just like, and that's the word, thank you, contaminating, but just and also kind of how it was written. Like I wonder if the author was somewhere on the spectrum, just cause how it was written. It just felt very, like, specific. I don't know if anyone else was getting that vibe, but it was the vibe I was getting, in which case it's kind of cool. Sorry, the sound is going to kill me. Yes. If you're neurospicy vibes, yeah. Yeah, which I kind of like. I mean, I kind of like. It's nice to get to read an author and just be like, I wonder if. But yeah, there's a bit of blurb about every author, so I'll have a little read of that in the break. But yes, we shall throw to a break. Your laptop. Oh yeah, laptops are loud. But yes, I shall throw us to a break. So everybody go do break-related stuff, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. turn. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you have had a good break and felt relaxed. I don't know. Excuse me. My voice is feels a little croaky. So we'll see how this goes. You've refilled your iced tea. Nice. Oh, excuse me. I've got the moon is shining very brightly through my window. Hello. It's been doing a good line in looking spooky through clouds for the last couple of days. So good job, the moon. But yeah. I have put the text for the next story, up on top of chat. You think you just spooked a flock of blackbirds in the backyard? Oh dear. I don't think I've ever seen a flock of blackbirds. Usually in like pairs, aren't they? Kind of cool. But yes, I think I'll just crack on to the next one. They flock every fall. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I mean, I know they flock, but I'm just realising I don't think I've ever seen a flock of blackbirds around here. Yeah. Trying to get food before migrating, yeah, fair. Yeah. Unless American blackbirds are different from UK blackbirds. This might be a thing. Because I know our UK robins are different from American robins. Like slightly different species. I don't know if they're different species or just different colouring or whatever. Anyway, don't you dare kite me onto bird talk. That's a dangerous thing to do. You don't migrate that. Oh, okay. Birds. Yes, I know. We all know. We all love birds. Birds are wonderful. I love them very much. But stop, all of you. Stop it. I'm not going to be talking about birds. I'm talking about spooky things. And birds can be spooky, I know, but this is not now. Burbs are friends, I know. I love burbs. But now is not the time for burb talk. Now is the time for reading our second story of tonight, which is Between Sunset and Moonrise by R.H. Malden. During the early part of last year, it fell to me to act as executor for an old friend. We had not seen much of each other of late, as he had been living in the west of England, and my own time had been fully occupied elsewhere. The time of our intimacy had been when he was a vicar of a large parish not very far from Cambridge. I will call it Yaxham, though that is not its name. The place had seemed to suit him thoroughly. He had been on the best of terms with his parishioners and with the few gentry of the neighbourhood. The church demanded a custodian of antiquarian knowledge and artistic perception, and in these respects, too, my friend was particularly well qualified for his position. But a sudden nervous breakdown had compelled him to resign. The cause of it had always been a mystery to his friends, for he was barely middle-aged when it took place, and had been a man of robust health. His parish was neither particularly laborious nor harassing, and, as far as was known, he had no special private anxieties of any kind. But the collapse came with startling suddenness, and was so severe that, for a time, his reason seemed to be in danger. 2 years of rest and travel enabled him to lead a normal life again, but he was never the man he had been. He never revisited his old parish or any of his friends in the county, and seemed to be ill at ease if conversation turned upon the part of England in which it lay. It was perhaps not unnatural that he should dislike the place which had cost him so much, but his friends could not but regard as childish the length to which he carried his aversion. He had had a distinguished career at the university, and had kept up his intellectual interests in later life. But, except for an occasional succès d'estime in a learned periodical, he had published nothing. I was not without hope of finding something completed among his papers which would secure for him a permanent place in the world of learning, but in this I was disappointed. His literary remains were copious, and a striking testimony to the vigour and range of his intellect. But they were very fragmentary. There was nothing which could be made fit for publication, except one document which I should have preferred to suppress. But he had left particular instructions in his will that it was to be published when he had been dead for a year. Accordingly, I subjoin it exactly as it left his hand. It was dated 2 years after he had left Yaxholm, and nearly 5 before his death. For reasons which will be apparent to the reader, I make no comment of any kind upon it. The solicitude which my friends have displayed during my illness has placed me under obligations which I cannot hope to repay, but I feel that I owe it to them to explain the real cause of my breakdown. I have never spoken of it to anyone, for, had I done so, it would have been impossible to avoid questions which I should not wish to be able to answer. Though I have only just reached middle age, I am sure that I have not many more years to live. And I am therefore confident that most of my friends will survive me and be able to hear my explanation after my death. Nothing but a lively sense of what I owe to them could have enabled me to undergo the pain of recalling the experience which I am now about to set down. Yaxholm lies, as they will remember, upon the extreme edge of the Fen district. In shape it is a long oval, with a main line of railway cutting one end. The church and vicarage were close to the station, and round them lay a village containing nearly 5/6 of the entire population of the parish. On the other side of the line the fen proper began, and stretched for many miles. Though it is now fertile cornland, much of it had been permanently under water within living memory, and would soon revert to its original condition if it were not for the pumping stations. In spite of these, it is not unusual to see several hundred acres flooded in winter. My own parish ran for nearly 6 miles, and I had therefore several scattered farms and cottages so far from the village that a visit to one of them took up the whole of a long afternoon. Most of them were not on any road, and could only be reached by means of droves. For the benefit of those who are not acquainted with the fen, I may explain that a drove is a very imperfect sketch of the idea of a road. It is bounded by hedges or dykes, so that the traveller cannot actually lose his way, but it offers no further assistance to his progress. The middle is simply a grass track, and as cattle have to be driven along it, the mud is sometimes literally knee-deep in winter. In summer, the light peaty soil rises in clouds of sable dust. In fact, I seldom went down one without recalling Hesiod's unpatriotic description of his native village in Boeotia: bad in winter, intolerable in summer, good at no time. At the far end of one of these lay a straggling group of 6 cottages, of which the most remote was inhabited by an old woman who I will call Mrs. Vries. In some ways she was the most interesting of all my parishioners, and she was certainly the most perplexing. She was not a native, but had come to live there some 20 years before, and it was hard to see what had tempted a stranger to so unattractive a spot. It was the last house in the parish. Her nearest neighbour was 1/4 of a mile away, and she was fully 3 miles from a hard road or shop. The house itself was not at all a good one. It had been unoccupied, I was told, for some years before she came to it, and she had found it in a semi-ruinous condition. Yet she had not been driven to seek a very cheap dwelling by poverty, as she had a good supply of furniture of very good quality, and apparently as much money as she required. She never gave the slightest hint as to where she had come from, or what her previous history had been. As far as was known, she never wrote or received any letters. She must have been between 50 and 60 when she came. Her appearance was striking, as she was tall and thin, with an aquiline nose and a pair of very brilliant dark eyes, and a quantity of hair, snow white by the time I knew her. At one time she must have been handsome, but she had grown rather forbidding, and I used to think that, a couple of centuries before, she might have had some difficulty in proving that she was not a witch. Though her neighbours, not unnaturally, fought rather shy of her, her conversation showed that she was a clever woman who had at some time received a good deal of education and had lived in cultivated surroundings. I used to think that she must have been an upper servant, most probably a lady's maid in a good house, and despite the ring on her finger, suspected that the Mrs. was brevet rank. One New Year's Eve I thought it my duty to visit her. I had not seen her for some months, and a few days of frost had made the drove more passable than it had been for several weeks. But, in spite of her interesting personality, I always found that it required a considerable moral effort to call at her cottage. She was always civil, and expressed herself pleased to see me. But I could never get rid of the idea that she regarded civility to me in the light of an insurance which might be claimed elsewhere. I always told myself that such thoughts were unfounded and unworthy, but I could never repress them altogether, and whenever I left her cottage it was with a strong feeling that I had no desire to see her again. I used, however, to say to myself that it was really due to personal pique, because I could never discover that she had any religion, nor could I instil any into her, and that the fault was therefore more mine than hers. On this particular afternoon, the prospect of seeing her seemed more than usually distasteful, and my disinclination increased curiously as I made my way along the drove. So strong did it become that if any reasonable excuse for turning back had presented itself, I am afraid I should have seized it. However, none did, so I held on, comforting myself with the thought that I should begin the new year with a comfortable sense of having discharged the most unpleasant of my regular duties in a conscientious fashion. When I reached the cottage, I was a little surprised at having to knock 3 times, and by hearing the sound of bolts cautiously drawn back. Presently the door opened and Mrs. Vries peered out. As soon as she saw who it was, she made me very welcome as usual, but it was impossible not to feel that she had been more or less expecting some other visitor whom she was not anxious to see. However, she volunteered no statement, and I thought it better to pretend to have noticed nothing unusual. On a table in the middle of the room lay a large book in which she had obviously been reading. I was surprised to see that it was a Bible, and that it lay open at the Book of Tobit. Seeing that I had noticed it, Mrs. Vries told me, with a little hesitation, I thought, that she had been reading the story of Sarah and the fiend Asmodeus. Then, the ice once broken, she plied me almost fiercely with questions. To what cause did I attribute Sarah's obsession in the first instance? Did the efficacy of Tobias's remedy depend on the fact that it had been prescribed by an angel? And much more to the same effect. Naturally, my answers were rather vague, and her good manners could not conceal her disappointment. She sat silent for a minute or two, while I looked at her, not, I must confess, without some alarm, for her manner had been very strange, and then said abruptly, "Well, will you have a cup of tea with me?" I assented gladly, for it was nearly 4:30, and it would take me nearly an hour and a half to get home. She took some time over the preparations, and during the meal talked with even more fluency than usual. I could not help thinking that she was trying to make it last as long as possible. Finally, at about 5:30, I got up and said that I must go, as I had a good many odds and ends awaiting me at home. I held out my hand, and as she took it said, "You must let me wish you a very happy New Year." She stared at me for a moment, and then broke into a harsh laugh, and said, "If wishes were horses, beggars might ride. Still, I thank you for your goodwill. Goodbye." About 30 yards from her house there was an elbow in the drove. When I reached it, I looked back and saw that she was still standing in her doorway, with her figure sharply silhouetted against the red glow of the kitchen fire. For one instant, the play of shadow made it look as if there were another, taller figure behind her, but the illusion passed directly. I waved my hand to her and turned the corner. It was a fine, still, starlit night. I reflected that the moon would be up before I reached home, and my walk would not be unpleasant. I had naturally been rather puzzled by Mrs. Vreese's behaviour, and decided that I must see her again before long, to ascertain whether, as it seemed possible, her mind were giving way. When I had passed the other cottages of the group, I noticed that the stars were disappearing, and a thick white mist was rolling up. This did not trouble me. The drove now ran straight until it joined the high road, and there was no turn into it on either side. I had therefore no chance of losing my way, and anyone who lives in the fens is accustomed to fogs. It soon grew very thick, and I was conscious of the slightly creepy feeling which a thick fog very commonly inspires. I had been thinking of a variety of things, in somewhat desultory fashion, when suddenly, almost as if it had been whispered into my ear, a passage from the Book of Wisdom came into my mind and refused to be dislodged. My nerves were good then, as I had often walked up a lonely drove in a fog before, but still, just at that moment, I should have preferred to have recalled almost anything else. For this was the extract with which my memory was pleased to present me. For neither did the dark recesses that held them guard them from fears, but sounds rushing down rang around them, and phantoms appeared, cheerless with unsmiling faces. And no force of fire prevailed to give them light, neither were the brightest flames of the stars strong enough to illumine that gloomy night. And in terror they deemed the things which they saw to be worse than that sight on which they could not gaze, and they lay helpless, made the sport of magic art. Suddenly I heard a loud snort, as of a beast, apparently at my elbow. Naturally I jumped and stood still for a moment to avoid blundering into a stray cow, but there was nothing there. The next moment I heard what sounded exactly like a low chuckle. This was more disconcerting, but common sense soon came to my aid. I told myself that the cow must have been on the other side of the hedge, and not really so close as it had seemed to be. What I had taken for a chuckle must have been the squelching of her feet in a soft place. But I must confess that I did not find this explanation as convincing as I could have wished. I plodded on, but soon began to feel unaccountably tired. I say unaccountably because I was a good walker and often covered much more ground than I had done that day. I slackened my pace, but as I was not out of breath, that did not relieve me. I felt as if I were wading through water up to my middle, or through very deep, soft snow, and at last was fairly compelled to stop. By this time I was thoroughly uneasy, wondering what could be the matter with me. But as I had still nearly 2 miles to go, there was nothing for it but to push on as best I might. When I started again, I saw that the fog seemed to be beginning to clear, though I could not feel a breath of air. But instead of thinning in the ordinary way, it merely rolled back a little on either hand, producing an effect which I had never seen before. Along the sides of the drove lay 2 solid banks of white, with a narrow passage clear between them. This passage seemed to stretch for an interminable distance, and at the far end I perceived a number of figures. I say advisedly perceived rather than saw, for I do not know whether I saw them in the ordinary sense of the word or not. That is to say, I did not know then, and have never been able to determine since, whether it was still dark. I only know that my power of vision seemed to be independent of light or darkness. I perceived the figures as one sees the creatures of a dream, or the mental pictures which sometimes come when one is neither quite asleep nor awake. They were advancing rapidly, in orderly fashion, almost like a body of troops. The scene recalled very vividly a picture of the Israelites marching across the Red Sea between two perpendicular walls of water in a set of Bible pictures which I had had as a child. I suppose that I had not thought of that picture for more than 30 years, but now it leapt into my mind, and I found myself saying aloud, "Yes, of course it must have been exactly like that. How glad I am to have seen it." I suppose it was the interest of making the comparison that kept me from feeling the surprise which would otherwise have been occasioned by meeting a large number of people marching down a lonely drove after dark on a raw December evening. At first I should have said there were 30 or 40 in the party, but when they had drawn a little nearer they seemed to be not more than 10 or a dozen strong. A moment later, I saw to my surprise that they were reduced to 5 or 6. The advancing figures seemed to be melting into one another, something after the fashion of dissolving views. Their speed and stature increased as their numbers diminished, suggesting that the survivors had, in some horrible fashion, absorbed the personality of their companions. Now there appeared to be only 3. Then one solitary figure of gigantic stature rushing down the drove towards me at a fearful pace, without a sound. As he came, the mist closed behind him, so that his dark figure was thrown up against a solid background of white, much as mountain climbers are said sometimes to see their own shadows upon a bank of cloud. On and on he came, until at last he towered above me, and I saw his face. It has come to me once or twice since in troubled dreams, and may come again. But I am thankful that I have never had any clear picture of it in my waking moments. If I had, I should be afraid for my reason. I know that the impression which it produced upon me was that of intense malignity, long baffled, and now at last within reach of its desire. I believe I screamed aloud. Then, after a pause which seemed to last for hours, he broke over me like a wave. There was a rushing and a streaming all round me, and I struck out with my hands as if I was swimming. The sensation was not unlike that of rising from a deep dive. There was the same feeling of pressure and suffocation, but in this case coupled with the most intense physical loathing. The only comparison which I can suggest is that I felt as a man might feel if he were buried under a heap of worms or toads. Suddenly I seemed to be clear, and fell forward on my face. I am not sure whether I fainted or not, but I must have lain there for some minutes. When I picked myself up, I felt a light breeze upon my forehead, and the mist was clearing away as quickly as it had come. I saw the rim of the moon above the horizon, and my mysterious fatigue had disappeared. I hurried forward as quickly as I could without venturing to look behind me. I only wanted to get out of that abominable drove onto the high road, where there were lights and other human beings. For I knew that what I had seen was a creature of darkness and waste places, and that among my fellows I should be safe. When I reached home, my housekeeper looked at me oddly. Of course, my clothes were muddy and disarranged, but I suspect that there was something else unusual in my appearance. I merely said that I had had a fall coming up a drove in the dark and was not feeling particularly well. I avoided the looking-glass when I went to my room to change. Coming downstairs, I heard through the open kitchen door some scraps of conversation, or rather of a monologue delivered by my housekeeper, to the effect that no one ought to be about the droves after dark as much as I was, and that it was Providence that things were no worse. Her own mother's uncle had, it appeared, been down just such another drove on just such another night, 42 years ago, come next Christmas Eve. They brought him home on a barrow with both his eyes drawed down and every drop of blood in his body turned, but he would never speak to what he see, and wild cats couldn't have scratched it out of him. An inaudible remark from one of the maids was met with a long sniff, and the statement, "Girls seem to think they know everything nowadays." I spent the next day in bed, as besides the shock which I had received, I had caught a bad cold. When I got up on the 2nd, I was not surprised to hear that Mrs. Vries had been found dead on the previous afternoon. I had hardly finished breakfast when I was told that the policeman, whose name was Winter, would be glad to see me. It appeared that on New Year's morning a half-witted boy of 17, who lived at one of the other cottages down the drove, had come to him and said that Mrs. Vries was dead, and that he must come and enter her house. He declined to explain how he had come by the information, so at first Mr. Winter contented himself with pointing out that it was the 1st of January, not of April. But the boy was so insistent that finally he went. When repeated knockings at Mrs. Vries's cottage produced no result, he had felt justified in forcing the back door. She was sitting in a large wooden armchair, quite dead. She was leaning forward a little, and her hands were clasping the arms so tightly that it proved to be a matter of some difficulty to unloose her fingers. In front of her was another chair, so close that if anyone had been sitting in it, his knees must have touched those of the dead woman. The seat cushions were flattened down as if it had been occupied recently by a solid personage. The tea things had not been cleared away, but the kitchen was perfectly clean and tidy. There was no suspicion of foul play, as all the doors and windows were securely fastened on the inside. Winter added that her face made him feel quite sickish-like, and that the house smelt very bad for all that it was so clean. A post-mortem examination of the body showed that her heart was in a very bad state, and enabled the coroner's jury to return a verdict of death from natural causes. But the doctor told me privately that she must have had a shock of some kind. In fact, he said, if anyone ever died of fright, she did. But goodness knows what could have frightened her in her own kitchen unless it was her own conscience. But that is more in your line than mine. He added that he had found the examination of the body peculiarly trying, though he could not or would not say why. As I was the last person who had seen her alive, I attended the inquest, but only gave formal evidence of an unimportant character. I did not mention that the second armchair had stood in a corner of the room during my visit, and that I had not occupied it. The boy was of course called and asked how he knew she was dead, but nothing satisfactory could be got from him. He said that there was right houses and there was wrong houses, not to say persons, and that they had been after her for a long time. When asked whom he meant by they, he declined to explain, merely adding as a general statement that he could see further into a milestone than what some people could, for all they thought themselves so clever. His own family deposed that he had been absolutely silent, contrary to his usual custom, from tea-time on New Year's Eve to breakfast-time next day. Then he had suddenly announced that Mrs. Vries was dead, and ran out of the house before they could say anything to him. Accordingly, he was dismissed, with a warning to the effect that persons who were disrespectful to constituted authorities always came to a bad end. It naturally fell to me to conduct the funeral, as I could have given no reason for refusing her Christian burial. The coffin was not particularly weighty, but as it was being lowered into the grave, the ropes supporting it parted, and it fell several feet with a thud. The shock dislodged a quantity of soil from the sides of the cavity, so that the coffin was completely covered, before I had time to say, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Afterwards the sexton spoke to me apologetically about the occurrence. "I'm fair put about, sir, about them ropes," he said. "Nothing of that sort ever happened before in my time. They was pretty nigh new, though, new too, and I thought they'd have done us for years. But just look here, sir." Here he showed two extraordinarily ravelled ends. "I never see a rope part like that before. Almost looks as if it had been scratted through by a big cat or something." That night I was taken ill. When I was better, my doctor said that rest and change of scene were imperative. I knew that I could never go down a drove alone by night again, so tendered my resignation to my bishop. I hope that I have still a few years of usefulness before me, but I know that I can never be as if I had not seen what I have seen. Whether I met with my adventure through any fault of my own, I cannot tell. But of one thing I am sure. There are powers of darkness which walk abroad in waste places, and that man is happy who has never had to face them. If anyone who reads this should ever have a similar experience, and should feel tempted to try to investigate it further, I commend him to the counsel of Jesus ben Sirah. "My son, seek not things that are too hard for thee, and search not out things that are above thy strength." The end. Thank you for listening. I quite like that one. It's nice and vague. Cambridgeshire is spooky. The fens are spooky. Flat and misty and stuff. So, yeah, I like that one. And, yeah. Final quote is quite a good ending, yeah. I like that. I like it's yeah, sort of, it feels like it's not doing the whole kind of like, but it was the devil, which seems to be a thing for ghost stories a lot of the time, especially if it's written from, someone who, either an author who is very Christian or a character who is a curate or a vicar or something like that. It's just like, but I knew it was the devil, therefore I had to fight him, and this was just weird shit. We're not sure what it was, but I really like the imagery in that one of just like the mist parting and the drove just being there, and then there's like a crowd of people that slowly sort of meld into one enormous figure, and it's like, oh, that's really flippin' scary. Like, it's just like, and they speed up. I was like, oh, I love that, but also that's a really good image. Scary stuff. Weird stuff happened, maybe better just leave well enough alone. Exactly. Which I feel like is the moral of the story for a lot of these kind of things. Oh, excuse me. Anyway, I'm going to go. I don't think I'll raid. I'm a bit tired. But thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for everybody who resubbed. Thank you for the raid. And yeah, in theory, Sam will be back on Saturday with the first part of Diary of a Nobody, which should be exciting and fun. Reminds you a lot of the ghost stories you find in Appalachia. God, I can't speak today. You hear somebody calling your name out in the woods at night? No, you didn't. Oh, yeah, spoopy. Appalachia. I always thought it was Appalachia. The Appalachian Trail. Anyway, one of those. Sorry, America. But yes, thank you all very much for being here. That is what people not from here call it. Ah, well, there we go. I'm also not from there, so... But yes, everybody, I hope have a good rest of your day, night, whatever time of day it is. Thank you all very much for being here. Go take care of yourselves, and we shall see you back hopefully on Saturday. Thank you very much indeed, and good night. Goodbye.